Well, it's time now for Perspective, and we're staying with our top story today, the latest deadly flare-up of violence between Israel and Hamas, and of course also those scenes of violence we've been witnessing across Israel's ethnically mixed towns and cities. My guest today is Alain Dieckhoff, a research professor at Sciences Po University, specialising in Israeli politics and society. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24 today. Now, we've seen large buildings topple in Gaza, hundreds of rockets lighting up the sky over Israel. The level of violence is shocking, but it's also nothing new. Do you think this latest bout of violence was to some extent inevitable?
I wouldn't say that. I think it's a process which developed starting mid-April when there were some clashes in Jerusalem, mainly between Arab residents and some Israeli Jewish extremists, and the police between them trying to keep things more or less calm. I think it was mainly focused on Jerusalem for a long time. It was only in the most latest day then when Hamas took the decision to throw some rockets directly towards Jerusalem that the conflict changed in nature and became what we see today, a much more in-depth conflict. But it wasn't something which was sure at the beginning.
Now, armed groups in Gaza do appear somewhat more effective than they have in previous years. The number of rockets, for example, being fired from Gaza is higher than we've seen in recent years. How do you explain that? Is this simply a case of Israel not being prepared enough?
I mean, in some ways, I think that it was a surprise to Israel that Hamas took the decision so quickly, in fact, to throw rockets towards Jerusalem and all the cities. And I would guess that there was some kind of surprise on their side. But on the other side, I think it's not a surprise that Hamas took in last years several rockets. I mean, they have a lot of arsenal. We know already that they had that. But of course, knowing exactly how many rockets they have is very difficult, I think, even for the secret services of Israel.
And in previous years, when we've seen this sort of violence, often it's followed by a ground incursion by the IDF. Are you expecting to see that this time round?
I think if the situation doesn't calm down in the really, I would say 24 48 hours, yes, we can expect at least a small ground operation in Gaza. I would also add one thing which makes the situation very different, not very, but in some ways different. If we compare that with the last very important conflict in 2014, the difference is that this time it's not only Hamas and Israel, it's also always what we see in the so-called mixed town within Israel. And this is something new. The last time we had this kind of clashes within Israeli cities, you have to go back to the year 2000 at the beginning of the Al-Aqsa Intifada. So this is something quite new, which shows that the clashes are various degrees. Of course, they are not the same as the clash between Hamas and the IDF, but there is something which is different this time.
And how do you go about explaining this seemingly renewed anger among Israel's Arab population? What's at the root of it?
I mean, the root is in a way. There are two things. One is it all began with some demonstration of Israeli Arabs, mainly in Lod and in Akko, in other so-called mixed cities, in solidarity of Palestinians in Jerusalem, and showing a kind of Muslim solidarity around the cause of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this was the beginning, but the the more when you look more what's going on the ground is you see in fact the sense of discrimination of Arab Israeli citizens, which is a fact. I mean, when you look at different kind of figures, for instance, the budgets in Arab cities, and when you compare that with Jewish cities, you see clearly that there is an imbalance, which is in favor of Jewish cities and in defavor of Arab cities. So there is something which is more in depth, linked with the ethnic composition of Israeli society, and this ethnic composition is clear. You have 80% of Jews and 20% of Arabs, which are both citizens, so have the same rights, but in practice there is a difference, obviously.
And of course, this is the million-dollar question. I'm not the first to ask it. I won't be the last to ask it. How do you go about trying to break this cycle of violence?
I think that the outcome it depends. First, it depends how long it will take to end the current clashes. But I think the end of the tunnel is more or less always the same. You will see some diplomatic initiatives coming from the US, and I think they will come maybe slowly, but they will come, and maybe also some resolution at the UN Security Council. And after that, I think that things will more or less stop, maybe after also a military ground offensive. I don't know exactly what will be really on the table, but something like that. And the problem is that we will have surely a short-term answer, but in the long run, nothing will be solved. So in the long run, I think we should begin once again a more seriously renewal of the negotiations, but this is something which hasn't happened in the last 15 years, and I'm not sure that with the current government and of Netanyahu, and even if it's Yair Lapid is taking over after him, we will see that we will restart serious negotiations. But it's clear that this should be done.
Alain Dieckhoff, a research professor at Sciences Po University, specialising in Israeli politics and society. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24 today.